The car is still running. That is the first thing the boys notice. The engine turning over in the gray January morning, headlights cutting through the frost, the radio murmuring static into the frozen air along the Sun River. The door is closed. The car is in gear. Everything about it says ready to go, except it isn't going anywhere. And then one of them sees the body. He is face down in the dirt beside the driver's door. His hands are cinched behind his back with his own belt. He has been shot in the head. His wallet is still in his pocket. His camera rests untouched on the seat inside, loaded with film that will never be developed. This is not a robbery. This is not a fight that went wrong. Whoever did this controlled the situation completely. They bound him first. Then they executed him. And then, in the silence of the Montana plains, with no witnesses and no trail, they took the girl. She is not here. She is somewhere out in Cascade County, and the clock is running. It is the morning of January 3rd, 1956, and the answer to what happened on this road will not come for 65 years. This is the story of Patricia Kalitzke and Lloyd Duane Bogle, two young people whose lives ended on a frozen Montana night, and the single microscopic speck of biological evidence that survived 6.5 decades waiting to tell the truth. If you're new here, this channel covers true crime cases with verified facts, primary sources, and no speculation. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Now let's go back to Great Falls. In 1955, Great Falls, Montana was the kind of place where everyone knew your name before you knew theirs. A high plains city built on the Missouri River, anchored by Malmstrom Air Force Base on its eastern edge, and organized around the rhythms of ranch work, church, and Friday night drive-ins. It was not a place where terrible things happened. Not like this. Patricia Kalitzke, Patty, to everyone who knew her, was 16 years old and a junior at Great Falls High School. She was not on the margins of her world. She was the center of it. The sock hops, the drive-in movies, the casual certainty of a life unfolding exactly as it should. Friends described a girl who moved through a room the way water moves, easily, naturally, pulling everything toward her. She was not naive. She was not reckless. She was a 16-year-old girl living an ordinary 1955 life in a city that had given her no reason to be afraid. Lloyd Duane Bogle arrived at Malmstrom from Waco, Texas, assigned to the 29th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. He was 18, a long way from home, and by December of 1955, he had found Patty Kalitzke. What started as a shared love of music and dancing became something more. By the new year, the airman and the high school girl were inseparable. He carried a camera, a good one, the kind that signals a person paying attention to where they are and who they're with. He wanted to remember this. On the evening of January 2nd, 1956, they went on a date. Pete's Drive-In, just after 9 o'clock. Then, like dozens of young couples in Great Falls on any given night, they drove toward the Sun River, toward the stretch of road near Wadsworth Park that the young people of the city had claimed as their own. Lover's Lane, a place of privacy at the edge of the plains. They were last seen alive going in that direction. When neither of them came home, both families reached for the same explanation. They eloped. It happened. This was the era for it. Young love, impulsive decisions, a courthouse somewhere down the road. By noon on January 3rd, that explanation had collapsed entirely. 3 boys hiking along the Sun River near Wadsworth Park found the car first. The engine was running. The headlights were on. The radio played static. The car sat at the edge of the road, pointed outward as if ready to leave, but it had not left. Lloyd Duane Bogle lay face down on the ground beside the driver's door. His hands had been bound behind his back with his own belt. He had been shot in the head. His wallet was in his pocket. The camera sat on the seat beside him, untouched. This scene told investigators something specific. The killer had not come for money. He had not come for the car or what was in it. He had come for control. He had disarmed the situation methodically, restrained Bogle, eliminated him, and then turned his attention to Patty. She was not there. She was gone. Cascade County law enforcement launched a search across the frozen landscape. For 2 days, they combed the earth. On January 4th, a county road worker found her. She was at the bottom of a 20-foot embankment on Vineyard Road, not far from Great Falls. She had been shot in the head. The autopsy confirmed what investigators had feared.
Patricia Kalitzke had been sexually assaulted. The pathologist swabbed her body and sealed the biological material on a glass microscope slide. In 1956, this was standard procedure, a step taken not because the science existed to exploit it, but because the science might someday exist. The slide was labeled, packaged, and filed in the Cascade County evidence room. It would wait there for 45 years before anyone could read what it said. The sequence of the crime pointed toward a single perpetrator acting with deliberate intent. Bogle was restrained and killed first, the threat neutralized. Patty was taken. The time between the Sun River and that embankment on Vineyard Road belonged entirely to him. No witnesses, no weapon ever recovered, no name. What the community of Great Falls knew was only this: 2 young people had left for Lover's Lane and come back in body bags. The newspaper headline that followed captured the raw shock of it. The city demanded answers. Law enforcement obliged and began one of the longest, most exhausting manhunts in the history of the state. The original investigation cast a wide net, as 1956 investigations did, driven by community pressure, limited technology, and the blunt instruments of the era. Over the weeks and months that followed, and then the years, and then the decades, law enforcement identified and pursued approximately 35 people of interest. Some were local men with histories of violence. Some were airmen from Malmstrom who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Some were names that surfaced through tips, rumors, and the accumulated suspicion of a city that wanted someone to blame. One name jumped off the page in a way no other name did: James Joseph Bulger, known later to the world as Whitey Bulger, the South Boston crime lord whose name would become synonymous with organized violence, had been stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base from 1948 to 1952. In June of 1951, he was arrested by civilian and military authorities in Great Falls and charged with rape after being found in a hotel room with a 15-year-old girl. He was violent. He was local, within recent memory. He fit every instinctive profile investigators reached for. Bulger remained on the suspect list for years. He was ultimately eliminated, not by alibi, not by witness testimony, but by DNA. When the biological material from the 1956 slide was finally profiled in 2001, it ruled out Whitey Bulger conclusively. It ruled out Bogle. It ruled out every man whose DNA was in the system. And it pointed to no one. The case went cold again, and stayed cold. If you've made it this far, you already know this case is something different. Subscribe if you haven't. There's a lot more ground to cover. For 32 years after the murders, the evidence box sat in the Cascade County evidence room. Then, in the late 1980s, a detective named Phil Madison found it. He opened the file and felt the weight of it. 65 pages of handwritten notes, photographs beginning to curl at the edges, a list of suspects that had led nowhere. Madison began working the case in his off hours, the way cold case detectives do, slowly, methodically, waiting for the world to catch up to the crime. In 2001, he made the decision that would eventually break everything open. He sent the glass slide, the one from Patty's 1956 autopsy, to the Montana State Crime Lab. The scientists there extracted a single sperm cell. They built a DNA profile. They confirmed it did not belong to Bogle. They uploaded it to CODI's, the National Criminal DNA Database, and waited. Nothing came back. The profile of the killer sat in the database with no match, because the killer had no criminal record. He had never been arrested. He had never given a DNA sample to any law enforcement agency anywhere. CODI's was built to catch people who had already been caught once.
This man had never been caught at all. Madison eventually retired. The case file stayed open. Stay with me, this is where it turns. In 2012, Sergeant John Cadner was assigned the Kalitzke-Bogle case as his first cold case. He inherited a box of documents spanning 56 years. Handwritten notes from detectives long dead, photographs that smelled of age, a suspect list that had been exhausted.
Cadner started not with new leads, but with a scanner. He spent months converting the entire paper archive into a digital record, building a foundation for whatever came next. He understood that the answer was not in the paper. The answer was in the biology, in that single cell on that 1956 slide. And CODIS had already told him that the standard approach would not work. Then in 2018, everything changed. In Sacramento, California, investigators arrested Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, responsible for at least 13 murders and 50 rapes across California in the 1970s and 1980s. They did not catch him through CODIS. They caught him through forensic genetic genealogy, uploading his DNA profile to voluntary public genealogy databases, tracing his distant relatives, and building a family tree backwards from the crime scene until only one name was left. Cadner saw it immediately. The same logic applied to Great Falls. In 2019, he partnered with Bogle Technology, an accredited private forensics laboratory in Virginia. Scientists there took the degraded 1956 biological sample and, using next-generation SNP sequencing, a technique that reads single nucleotide variations across the entire genome, extracted a full, usable genetic profile. A profile dense enough to search not for the killer himself, but for his cousins. That profile was uploaded to voluntary, open-source genealogical databases. It returned matches to 3 anonymous individuals who shared common ancestors with the unknown suspect. Forensic genealogists at Bogle built a family tree backward from those matches, branch by branch, generation by generation, narrowing through geography and time. 2 branches led nowhere near Montana in January 1956. The 3rd branch led to a name that appeared nowhere in the investigative file. A name that had never been spoken in any interview room, never appeared on any suspect list, never drawn the attention of a single detective across 65 years of work. Kenneth Gould. Cadner began pulling records on Gould with the systematic focus of a man who had been waiting 9 years for a name to appear. What he found was a portrait of deliberate invisibility. In January 1956, Kenneth Gould was approximately 29 years old. He was a Great Falls native. He was married. He worked corralling and training horses. He had no criminal record, not an arrest, not a citation, not a complaint. Nothing that would have drawn him to the attention of any investigation. He lived approximately 1 mile from Patricia Kalitzke's home. He corralled horses just blocks from where she slept. He was known to ride through the area of Vineyard Road, the road where Patty's body was found at the bottom of that 20-foot embankment. And his name appeared on not a single page of the investigative file. Not as a suspect, not as a witness, not as a neighbor or acquaintance. In 65 years of investigation, no detective had ever knocked on his door. There was one additional detail that Cadner could not set aside. When Gould was 25 years old, he had married a girl who was 16. Patricia Kalitzke was 16. Cadner noted it without overstating it. The evidence, he said, spoke loud enough on its own. Just over 1 month after the murders, Gould sold his property near Tracy, Montana, and relocated his family. He moved them through 2 more Montana towns, Geraldine, then Hamilton, before leaving the state permanently in 1967. He settled in the Ozarks of Missouri, raised his children, grew old. He never returned to Montana. He never looked back. He just disappeared into the middle of the country and stayed there. Kenneth Gould died on May 31, 2007, in Oregon County, Missouri. His remains were cremated. When Cadner tracked down the timeline and laid it against the crime, the picture was complete. A man with no criminal record, a geographic connection to both victims and both crime scenes, a documented behavioral pattern involving underage girls, a property sale and flight from Great Falls within weeks of the murders, and a life spent in permanent exile from the state where he had done this thing. The evidence was overwhelming, but Gould was ash. There was no body to exhume, there was no arrest to make, there was no confrontation. There was only one path left. There was no trial. There will never be one. Kenneth Gould was 14 years dead when his name was identified. What happened instead was a scientific reckoning, the closest thing to a verdict that this case was ever going to get. Cadner traveled to Missouri and found Gould's children. He sat with them and explained, with the directness required of a man delivering news this heavy, that their deceased father was the primary suspect in a 65-year-old double homicide, that a 16-year-old girl and an 18-year-old airman had been murdered in Great Falls in 1956, that the DNA evidence extracted from the crime scene had led, through 3 years of forensic genealogy work, to their family. Gould's children did not argue. They did not defend him. They did not refuse. They wanted to know.
3 family members agreed to provide DNA reference samples, voluntary swabs that would either confirm or eliminate their father as the source of the 1956 biological material. The samples were submitted for comparison against the crime scene profile. Before we get to those results, if this case is getting to you the way it's getting to me, subscribe, hit the bell. This is the kind of story that deserves to be heard. The comparison was definitive. The DNA extracted from Patricia Kalitzke's 1956 autopsy slide was a match to Kenneth Gould's children. The biological material left at that crime scene, preserved on a glass slide through the Cold War, the moon landing, the fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of the internet, and the death of the man it belonged to, had been waiting 65 years to say his name. Investigators announced that the comparison definitively linked the crime scene evidence to Gould. No other conclusion was scientifically supportable. After 65 years, here's where it lands. On June 8, 2021, Cascade County Sheriff Jesse Slaughter stood at a podium in Great Falls and announced the closure of the case. He described it plainly. "This is as good as it was ever going to get on a case like this. No handcuffs, no guilty verdict read aloud in a courtroom, no moment of confrontation between the man and the weight of what he had done, but a stamp on the file, a name on the record, and 65 years of open silence finally closed." One of Gould's children, speaking after the announcement, said something that settled over the case like a final word. "Sometimes you just don't know everybody's secrets." The resolution of a 65-year cold case should feel like an ending. It rarely does. Bogle's brother, James "Jim" Bogle, had carried the weight of his brother's unsolved murder for the entirety of his adult life. He died before the answer came. His widow told Cadner that the open wound of the case had shaped her husband's life completely, that not knowing had been its own specific, sustained injury. The answer that arrived on June 8, 2021, arrived too late for him. Patty's sister was still alive, but dementia had taken her ability to receive the news. The answer that the evidence had waited 65 years to deliver could not reach the one person still living who had loved Patty Kalitzke from the beginning. This is what 65 years does. It outlasts the people it was supposed to protect. Kenneth Gould spent 51 years after the murders living an ordinary life in the American interior. He raised children. He grew old. He died in 2007 in a county in Missouri where no one knew what he had done in Montana in 1956. He took it with him, or thought he had. What he did not account for was a pathologist in Great Falls who, in January of 1956, followed standard procedure and preserved a swab on a glass slide. He did not account for a detective named Phil Madison who found that slide in 2001 and sent it to a lab. He did not account for a sergeant named John Cadner who, in 2012, inherited a case older than his parents and refused to let it stay cold. He did not account for a company in Virginia that could sequence genetic material from a degraded 60-year-old sample. And he did not account for his own children, who, when a detective showed up at their door with the truth, chose to answer. The murder weapon was never found. No firearm has ever been recovered or matched to the crime. The exact circumstances of how Gould came to be at Lover's Lane on the night of January 2nd, 1956, whether he followed them, encountered them by chance, or targeted Patty specifically, remain unknown. Why he chose them, and what the interval between the Sun River and Vineyard Road looked like, exists in the record only as a gap. These questions do not have answers, and no answer should be invented where the evidence is silent. What is known is this: Patricia Kalitzke was 16 years old, and she deserved to come home. Lloyd Duane Bogle was 18, a long way from Texas, and he deserved to see morning. Forensic science did not solve this case. People did.
A pathologist in 1956 who preserved evidence he couldn't yet read. A detective in 2001 who understood that the future might be able to do what the present could not. A sergeant in 2012 who picked up a case no one expected to close and spent 9 years refusing to accept that answer. A laboratory that extracted a voice from biological material so old that the world had changed 3 times since it was collected. And 3 children who, when asked to help close a wound their father had opened, said yes. The glass slide still exists somewhere in the Cascade County record. Smaller than a fingernail, older than most of the people who will watch this video. It held 1 cell, 1 piece of a man who spent 51 years believing the cold and the distance had buried what he'd done. It hadn't. This case is now closed. The name is on the record. And somewhere in the history of Great Falls, Montana, a 16-year-old girl with a laugh that pulled people in and a future that stretched out flat and endless, she finally has an answer. She deserved it 65 years ago. If this case stayed with you, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit hardest. I read every one. And if you know someone who follows cold cases, share this. These stories deserve more than silence.